Today I'm going to be painting the RAF Spitfire Mk IIs from the Blood Red Skies box set. I'm going to be using Vallejo surface primer for the airbrush thinner, and the Hakata Royal Air Force paint set. So let's open this and see what you get in there. So in there you get 6 paints. So some of these I will thin down and put through the airbrush. Basically this one, because then... Can you hear that? It comes with an agitator inside it. So that's going to go on the bottom. Yeah, I'm already impressed that they put an agitator inside. So I'm going to give all these a good shake before I use them. But these are the 6 colours I'll be using. I'll start with airbrushing them with black primer. Then I'm going to do the bottoms with sea green. But I am going to go from some reference material to make sure I'm using the correct ones, because I think things like ocean grey and medium sea grey were introduced from 1941 onwards. This was the standard bottom colour till August 41. Interior grey green was the colour of the cockpit interiors, so I'm not going to be painting the cockpit interiors. Dark earth used on the upper surfaces, and dark green used on the upper surfaces. So this is the mix for the top, this is the bottom. I'm also going to be using some thinned down Agrax Earthshade to pick out all the panel lines, basically a thinned down wash, and I'll be applying that as a pin wash. So I'll thin it down and then I'll use a brush to do the panel lines. So airbrush undercoat, airbrush Sky Type S, airbrush maybe a little on the top with the dominant colour, probably the dark earth, and then brush with the dark green. So I don't expect that to take an awful long time to do, but we shall see. So I'm going to come back in a second and do the airbrush undercoat. So in the airbrush I've mixed mainly the surface primer, because it is airbrush surface primer, but I have put a couple of drops of thinner inside it. So I grab a plane and you can see it start to darken. So I'm using a double action airbrush. You see how very quickly I start to do these. So in about see already some of that's dry, so I can switch over, polish off the wingtip, and that's the upper surface undercoated. Then I'm going to flip that over and start doing the lower surface. So that's how quick airbrush undercoating is. So I'm going to finish this off and I'm going to come back ready to do the Type S Sky. I've undercoated the Spitfires with the Vallejo airbrush primer, and that's now dry, and as you can see it's not obscured any of the detail. I'm now going to use Hitaka Type S Sky, which is an acrylic paint. It comes with an agitator inside. It looks a little thick, so I've thinned it down before putting it in the airbrush with a little bit of Vallejo airbrush thinner. So I've now got a nice chunk of it here, and I am going to... It's too thin. See, I've thinned that down too much. So a quick wipe is going to clear that up from the bottom of the plane. With a bit of tissue, and then I'll put that to one side while that dries, and I won't dilute it with thinner, and see if I get a nice slightly thicker coat. As you can see, I'm having to gun the airbrush because the paint's slightly thicker. But that's dried straight away and is the first coat of probably two. This plane needs. And as you can see, I build it up with the second coat. Maybe a very light third coat is required. And again, I'm having to gun the airbrush. But look at that. That's exactly what I wanted. That coat looks pretty good. So that's one done. I'm going to do the other 5 off camera. I think this wingtip just needs a little bit of touching up. But yeah, look at it now. That looks absolutely perfect. So I'm going to do the rest of these planes, and then I'm going to come back, show you the results, and then start on the top. I've done the underside using the Sky Grey, Sky Type S. I'm now going to use the Dark Earth, and I'm going to give the top side a coat. So this will be the last thing I do with the airbrush. After that, I'm going to have to apply the dark green using a standard brush. So I've got some Dark Earth and a little bit of airbrush thinner. And you can see how quickly that goes on. And suddenly I've got quite a good dark brown on the top. So from that, I'm going to give it another second thin coat. So I'm going to do all of these planes with a nice dark brown on the top. So once that's done, and I've given it 2 thin coats, it'll be ready to switch to the brush. So I'm going to do these so that we've got dark brown top, Sky Type S bottom, and then I'm going to come back and start doing some brush work. I've tried 2 different techniques with these. I'm applying the dark green through an airbrush. I've masked with blue tack a couple of the planes, and one I just used the airbrush without doing any masking. And to be fair, it looks fine. So the last 3 planes, I'm just going to do with the airbrush. So, as you can see, it's literally the work of minutes. So I'll add another couple of drops of paint, and then we're literally at the point where all the base coats are down. And it's time for letting that dry, and then doing some of the detail work. So that's all the base coats applied with airbrush over an airbrush primer, and it's got to here when we're ready to do the detail and then varnish the model before transfers are applied. So I'll come back in a second and show you how to do the detail. You can see the difference between the airbrushed and the masked planes. I do prefer the masking, to be honest. It gives a much clearer contrast. I've got some Calidor Sky, which is a nice blue paint, because it is time to start doing the detail work. And that means picking out the cockpit windows. So I've got to do this with all of these planes. So I'm only going to do a little bit on camera, just enough that you can see exactly how it's done and what it looks like. So I'll be back in a minute with that done to do a little bit more detailing. The canopy is painted and dry. I've got a little bit of black in the palette, and I'm going to use that to do the nose cones and to pick out the frame on the canopy. So as you can see, you can fairly quickly cover the nose cone with a great deal of precision. And to be honest, I 100% am glad I did almost everything on this with the airbrush. So suddenly you've got a black nose and it's really almost done. So I'm going to do the rest of the noses and pick out the canopy frames off camera, and then I'll come back, put a little bit of white lining in the windows, and then it's gloss varnish time. I've also put a little chaos black on the wheels and varnished the bottom of the planes. So the last step is going to be getting a little bit, just a tiny little bit of white, and put in some edge highlights on the canopy, and then varnishing the top of the plane. That makes it ready for transfers, which I'll have to wait to get here because they don't include them in the starter set. So with those highlights, the last stage is going to be a very thin wash, so I'm going to come back in a minute and do that. It's now time for the last stage. I've got a slightly thinned down Angrax Earthshade wash, which I'm going to brush over the model to bring out all of the panel lines. So if there's too much wash, I can just go over it again with the brush to remove it, because I really do only want to be filling in the panel lines. So as you can see, brings out all the panel lines. After this, it's just a coat of gloss varnish, and then I'll apply the transfers as soon as I've got them, and then apply a coat of matte varnish. But that is painting Spitfires from the Blood Red Skies box set. It's a doddle, basically. They're small scale models, you don't have to do highlights, it's literally just base coats and wash, which gives you something that is very quick to paint, very easy to paint, but does look pretty good. I did almost all of it with airbrush, which sped this process up quite a lot, and if you've got an airbrush I would recommend doing so. I do think the massed Spitfires look a bit better than the ones where I've done the airbrush in freehand, but they do all look good. It's not a case of the ones where I've done it freehand looking terrible. So that's how to get your Blood Red Skies Spitfires painted. Also, I'm very impressed with the Hitaka paints. I think they were really good for doing this, and the set that I've got cost 15 quid for 6 paints. That's £2.50 each for the exact RAF colours. So again, I'd recommend that. If you've liked this video, hit like and subscribe. If you want to chat, leave a comment below. But otherwise, good gaming.